The Anasazi were an ancient culture that lived in the Colorado Plateau. No one knows why they built their fortified cities, but we do know that their entire civilization ended suddenly when they abandoned their homes. Some have speculated that the nature spirits worshipped by the Anasazi became destructive demons when the community ceased to maintain their sacred laws. These beings terrorized the population, often appearing to children before taking them away forever.
Hidden deep under the canyon walls of the New Mexico desert, you will find a mysterious ancient city. A place of legend, a place of mystical rituals and supernatural tales. Was the knowledge of this ancient city suppressed or lost is a question among many. But what I and many have gathered is that the occupants seemingly disappeared overnight, nearly 1,000 years ago. Even till this present day, archaeologists and historians are unable to find out exactly what happened. But is this truly the case, or is it another cover-up? To those who are not yet familiar with this channel, we like to lift the veil and expose the fabrication of not just history of humanity, but the deeper falsehood of our reality, the spiritual wickedness in high places, the constant war against consciousness and the oppression of information, to keep the children of God at a low vibrational state. The ancient Anasazi Civilization was one amongst many that have come and gone from this planet, that have obtained superior knowledge about astronomy, mathematics, ritualistic magic, and some claim they possessed supernatural abilities.
During research for our best-selling book, On the Path of the Immortals, I was given the unprecedented opportunity, really, to sit down with and to film Dr. Don Mose Jr., a third-generation medicine man who I met with for a large part of the day during our investigation, and he told me the oldest legends of the Anasazi, which he had been told by his great-grandfather, who likewise had been told by his ancestors, which included stories of the Anasazi turning to sorcery, to sacrifice, cannibalism, after they had lost their way and were driven insane by a reptilian creature, which they depict with a halo above his head, of all things. Images of that being are, by the way, included in the petroglyphs. And I believe that they likely attest to the fallen reptile or reptiles of biblical fame, which also misled humanity. He began drawing in the sand on the floor and reciting the first part of the story of the ancient Anasazi and how it had been repeated to him by his father and grandfather, who had also been told by their ancestors and so on. A legend that Dr. Mose alone had undoubtedly repeated hundreds of times before at the Navajo school. Now, since it was obvious to us that this Navajo historian was really indifferent to our camera and our recording plans, and in fact I could tell he was really uncomfortable with us putting him on film, but thankfully he let us proceed nevertheless. But I sat there and listened respectfully as he proceeded for nearly 2 hours to describe to this white man what's only ever been allowed a few times in history before, and that is the legendary stories of creation, of giants, of a great flood, of a reptilian deceiver, all from the voice of the nation's top medicine man. Dr. Mose even sang to us in the antiquated tongue of what I would call Old Testament history, paralleled in their earliest antiquity using the Navajo language.
Over hundreds of years, locals have been sharing stories about crazy supernatural events that happen here in the canyon. You'll find drawings on the walls depicting these events. You'll find numerous amount of buildings in this ancient city still standing. The largest, Pablo Bonito, has more than 800 rooms and a building that's 4 or 5 stories tall. Hidden just beneath a cliff, behind Pablo Bonito, lies something that will make your eyeballs pop out your head. 4 giant feet carved into the mountainside. Each feet has 6 toes each. These toes are showing the feet of a Nephilim giant depicted in the Bible and other ancient texts. From the Book of Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 6. And yet again there was a war with Gath. He was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 4 and 20, 6 on each hand, 6 on each foot. And he was also the son of a giant. You hear legends of giants all around the globe, spreading around different cultures. 450 feet tall man-hungry monsters that wreak havoc among human population. These giants are said to have inhabited this area of New Mexico for thousands of years. The tribe also mentions other creatures that were summoned here into the canyon. These creatures have been carved into the canyon walls for everyone to see.
Not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events. For example, as Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the 4 corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but, and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament fiery serpent. Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, oh yes. And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to 2 of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors.
Everyone knows that in our ancient past, we used petroglyphs or clay tablets to document our history and great events that took place that had an impact on our planet as a collective. This spiral is found everywhere in the canyon and in every ancient culture worldwide. Do your research. This spiral can be identified as a portal, an interdimensional portal used by these spiritual entities to travel between this dimension and another. Now, if you ask me, I believe that there's many portals on this planet, one being the Bermuda Triangle. When you take a closer look at these spirals, you can see entities coming out of it and manifesting themselves into our reality. In different locations in the canyon, the same imagery with the same purpose is displayed. Actual monsters coming out of this portal, like we live in some movie. But believe me when I say, the truth is madder than fiction.
Legends materialized globally at approximately the same time. It's more likely than not, in my opinion, that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim. The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this first incursion of hybrid humans and six-toed giants is recorded in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the first incursion before the flood. And also after that, that is after the flood, the second incursion, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.